Okay, this is a video um, commemorating the first anniversary of my garden, and and I'm just going to discuss it here. In the first images, you see it's very quickly it's a transition from a parking lot. There it is, as a parking lot and a compost pile there, and that compost will become the basis for the garden that starting in May of 2016. There's the garden in its earliest stages, and then as time goes on, here it is. Here it is in late August, early September. Okay, so now let's talk about this transition from a parking place, and this is it. This is it again, back to a compost pile. Okay, so now I want to talk about this transition from a parking place to a permaculture garden. I call it permaculture, regenerative gardening, biodynamic garden. So over the as I do this voiceover while watching the images, I'll talk about the principles and the philosophy behind it, and we'll also see its progress. Well, let's start right here. Here I am in these images for a little while. We're just going to be watching my dog and me uh, compile the compost last fall, 1 year ago. That is in the fall of 2016, and this was an active compost pile, so it's about a meter and a half or about 5 feet in diameter, 3 or 4 feet high, and it composted all winter long. But you'll see what you're going to see here is me turning, well, Newton and I turning the pile a few times because it gets very hot in the center, and the idea was to make sure all of the different area parts of the compost pile pass through that heat, which is about 70-75 degrees Celsius, or something like 100 maybe 160 degrees at the best, Fahrenheit. Now, if it gets any hotter than that, you got a problem because it gets what they call thermophilic, and at that point, it starts to produce anaerobic bacteria, and those aren't the ones I want. So here I am, and you see that this is actually in the late fall, where and even into well, no, not quite into the winter. It's in the late fall that I'm turning it, but you'll see that I'm in t-shirts because of the heat. You'll watch the steam coming out of the center of it as I turn it. Now I got to say, I got to really enjoy turning it because what was happening was I was really I was really inspired and enthused by all of the life, the bacteria, and all of the microbes, bacteria that are um, reproducing exponentially inside of this as they decompose, as they eat through the nitrogen and the carbon to reproduce. And okay, why was that so cool for me? Why was that heat so cool? And that's because the whole purpose of this biodynamic garden, this project, was in response to the general uh, biocide, I call it. That is the killing of our planet's biology, and it's happening now on a global scale. And every time that we walk into a grocery store, I mean a grocery store supplied by the industrial chemical industrial agricultural complex, which I'm going to call the farm food complex. And in fact, in a broader scale, it's the farm food drug complex now. But in any case, I think most informed people know what I'm talking about. If you've read books on processing of foods, if you've read books on agriculture, modern chemical agriculture, you'll probably know of of the real concerns that we have. If not, then you should, then you'll to really understand what I'm talking about. You'd want to get a foundation in that. Now, the my response, and the question was first raised for me when I started to think about my dog. My dog is now three, going. He's not far from 3.5, but when I adopted him, he was just 3 months old, from a neighbor who didn't want him. He's a great dog, and he had some problems, skin problems especially. One of the first issues was, what should I be feeding him? And as I researched that, dog food, what is a biologically appropriate food for dog, what he should be eating, I also opened up the discussion to what I was eating, and I finally discovered I wasn't eating a biologically appropriate diet for myself either. Oh, here you see it's just I'm focusing there on how I was aerating my compost pile last year. These are just I have a few of these and a chimney in the middle made out of the same stuff to make sure the air circulated into the center of the compost pile. You can look at other videos we made to see why you do that. But in any case, why would that lead to this compost pile and my project of a garden? Well, uh, I discovered really the extent to which chemical agriculture, modern agriculture, was destroying not only the planet, but disrupting the carbon cycle, destroying the planet. When I said I mean killing the biology of the soil. We should be eating foods that are grown in rich, um, biologically diverse and uh, soils with. But when I say biologically diverse, I mean a diversity and a density of of microorganisms. Those if your food isn't grown in such soil, first of all, there are two problems. One is global. We could talk about that. The other is personal. That is individual. The damage you're doing to yourself, the damage we're doing to the planet. See, look, I'm getting a real kick out of this. Watch it, looking at all of the microorganisms that are propagating. The thing that's so great about this to me is in the context of a food supply and really now a global food supply that is destroying the soil. It was fascinating to me well, I've always loved gardening, but here I am finding another a really a new look at gardening in which uh, uh, it's the microorganisms that are so important. Microorganisms that the actual soil, not the plants you get, but the soil you're building. Now this, by the way, is what I did to the garden. I mean, I made this wall, a garden wall, out of branches that I just wove together around these pickets that hammered into the the really compacted earth underneath the uh, well, that was the parking space. And now what all I did was I uh, spread that compost all around, and that became the first year of the garden. Here I am starting to plant things in it. But that's not, I didn't add soil. The only soil that I added was at the beginning of the composting process when I added the soil from my pots, the pots on my balconies, because I have a lot of plants on my balcony. So I just threw that soil into the compost as well as soil that I picked up, like handfuls of soil from a few forests and fields that looked healthy to me. And that was just to introduce microorganisms into my compost. And so now we're going to look at the transformation of the garden over the course of the summer. But as we do that, let me get back to this issue of how our industrial agricultural um, industry is killing the soil. Right? We're using uh, pesticides and herbicides, and the main one really now is glyphosate. 2 billion pounds a year of glyphosate. That's a small garden, by the way, on the side. 2 billion pounds, or and growing every constantly, of glyphosate. Glyphosate on fields to grow grains, to grow cereals. Glyphosate has been patented as a herbicide and a chelator and an antibiotic. So it's killing. In other words, it was meant to kill the microbes in the soil, and that's what it's doing. So now our soil that we're growing food in is really on life support. However, and that number one is interfering with the carbon cycle. That means carbon is supposed to be pulled out of the atmosphere. First of all, we're putting too much carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, as everyone knows. But the second part of this interruption of the carbon cycle is that we're not letting it get back into the soil where it's always gone. So we're really disrupting this carbon cycle. Disrupting the carbon cycle is what's leading to global warming. We can have a big impact on that if we allow the soil to regenerate. Now you can look these things up. Regeneration International, these organizations. Regeneration International, 4 for 1,000. 4 for 1,000 is really cool. That's an organization that was formed in France to start with, that whose goal is to put 4.4% of carbon a year back into the soil. That is, increase the carbon content, which means increase the biology of the soil by 0.4% every year. If we were to manage to do that, we would be able to largely reverse global warming. So that is disrupting uh, the uh, uh, the carbon cycle. So that's number one. So that's why knowing that our agricultural soils are really on life support. I mean, the plants aren't being grown. We're not allowing plants to grow the way they have grown throughout evolutionary history. They're only now able to be grown by by farmers inside of this complex by adding all by additives, fertilizers, uh, herbicides, these are big monocultures, all of the biocides, fungicides, insecticides, and so on. Monocultures are not natural. That's not what nature wants to do. So one of the things I'm doing in this garden is to allow everything to grow that wants to. I'm planting all kinds of things in it. Never see the soil. I mean, I'm putting on ground covers so that the ground is completely covered up. And that worked this year. That is, the ground covers I used were uh, indigenous ginger, common thyme, ajuja, tarragon, clover. These things are we're covering it up so that, and I hope to continue that process. And I plant right into that stuff. By the way, the garden was just incredibly profuse. Look at the I planted things not only uh, for for food, to not only edibles but pretty edibles. So you see the scarlet runners, um, sunchokes. The sunchokes are great. I hope to keep them going over the years and intensify. I also put in hollyhocks for beauty. Nasturtiums, which are edible. Oh, the whole plant is edible. Nasturtiums, and they're really pretty. Um, Snow peas, tomatoes, um, uh, Swiss chard, which is beautiful. Lettuce. Um, oh, rhubarb. Well, there are grapes that have taken. Anyway, carrots, chives, onions, garlic, basil, other herbs. And then in order to also try to excuse me, try to penetrate that compacted earth underneath, I've planted comfrey, burdock, um, well, the grapes, tansy, and my hope is that those things will penetrate that earth and allow the biology to get below the soil. Now, that garden that you see there, that's grown entirely on that compost. That's a garden of compost. That's not soil, it's compost. And so what I'm really trying to do here is really accelerate what nature does. That is, I'm going to for next maybe for the next couple of years, I'll be making a big compost pile every year. I've done it again this year now that the garden has, of course, uh, uh, died back. By the way, this is in the Plateau-Mont-Royal in Montreal, which is the highest density population in Canada. So we just have little yards here. We have little front yards, little backyards, and I'm trying to demonstrate that you can do this. I wanted to see for myself that I could do it. And I'm just loving the idea of. I find it amazing to be able to create the circumstances in which life can regenerate. I mean, to see that how much life wants to come back. Uh, you know, the other thing is the other thing is the body on an individual level. So I talked about the need to put carbon back into the soil, to pull it out of the atmosphere, to make healthy soil, to make healthy plants. But why do we make healthy plants, and why do we should we make the food that we eat, the plants that we eat, and the plants that animals eat, if when we eat those animals as well, why do we want them to be grown in healthy soils? And that's clear to me now. My dog and I both have, and every human being, every mammal does, has a microbiome. But so do plants have a microbiome, and it's called the rhizosphere. It's the root system. It's all around the area around the roots that is full of microbes, a complex system of trillions of microbes, like we have in our own gut. Oh, by the way, that's the other small garden on the other side. Now, we mammals are not like you know we're not independent genetic beings. We depend uh, overwhelmingly on other organisms, and that is microbes, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, all those things, microbes in our guts, in order to metabolize elements and molecules to make them available for our own biological processes that are absolutely essential for life. We can't live without our microbes, and we can only live healthily with them. And the same thing with plants. But those the microbes that nurture and keep plants healthy are in constant communication with the microbes in our gut that keep us healthy. I want Newton and I to eat as much as possible of our food, and this is a small garden, but we got quite a lot. We got a large harvest from it, as much as we can from our our soil in our backyard. Is it soil yet? Well, it was compost, but over time it turns to soil. What I'm trying to do, as I say, is reproduce what nature does, and that is every year I'm adding compost. Well, if you look at a forest or a field, every year the organic material, leaves and etc., fall down and they become the next layer of soil. Well, what I'm doing here is making another layer of soil every year. I'm accelerating the process because I'm putting a huge layer of compost down every year. All I can say is, and the evidence that you can see before you, is that it worked. That is, this this project really, this garden was great. It there's a big diversity in it, large diversity in it, and I had no problems. I didn't have that one big tomato plant in the middle there had over 100 like big tomatoes on it. It was gorgeous. Nasturtiums, well, you can see the zucchini as well. Everything was rhubarb there in the background, sunchokes. Um, and in there, that's the foresty area there. There's some milkweed. Oh, there's a lot of things I planted for the pollinators as well, not just for humans but for pollinators. So um, now I had offered that compost pile that I made last fall, and I read Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, in which he makes this very claims that I've just made. That is that we need to regenerate the soil. We need to transform our relationship with nature. And I thought, well, he's great. He's great. This is exactly it. So I wrote a long letter analyzing Laudato Si and demonstrating that that and saying, look at, I sent this letter to the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, to my local parish, which has a great big lawn in front of it, and to the Vatican. I said, look at what you're talking about is excellent. But the thing is, the Catholic Church has all these properties around the world. Why don't you do it yourself? I mean, why aren't you? Why are there lawns on Catholic properties? Why aren't you making uh, why aren't you transforming your own as an example, your own properties into edible gardens and things? So I said, look, I'll give this to you. I'll give this to Saint Stanislas, which is my local great big cathedral, great big church just down the street. I said, look, you can have my compost to inoculate this great big lawn that you've got in front of the church, and we can and I'll help turn it into a edible garden. However, they they acknowledged that I sent it to them, but after that they didn't respond. So as a result of that, I used my compost, and as I continue to do, I'm doing it on my own property. By the way, here I am now. This is my latest one for this year, and this is my new system. I just put a broomstick in there, and I stick it right into the middle to see what the temperature is, and how hot it is, and how it smells. Then I know if it's time to change the turn the compost. Okay, that's it for now. There's our project.